everybody. It's a Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Thanks for being with me today. I cannot wait to get into it. We're not just talking about burgers and sausages and that. We're talking about an entire shifting food supply system. This is why I want to bring on my guest today. Welcome, Tom Mastrobuoni. It's nice to have you here with me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Nice to be with you.
Okay, so let me just quickly tell people who the heck you are, and then I want to set up the problem so that we can talk about the solution and the rest of the show. So you are the Chief Investment Officer of Big Idea Ventures. Your boss, or maybe I'll say colleague, pal, Andrew Ive has been on this show. But prior to Big Idea Ventures, you were the Chief Financial Officer of Tyson Ventures. So we're going to get into that at some point in the show. Let me set up the problem, and then we can talk about the solution. So when we were looking at feeding the planet, I'll say post-World War II, we were looking at churning out as much food as possible, quantity, and not really caring about efficiency or land or water or CO2 emissions, animal waste, plastic waste. None of these things were coming in. We were just looking at the lowest cost possible with the most food possible. That doesn't work for us anymore, obviously, particularly as we go from 7.6 billion people on the planet to 10 billion people on the planet from the UN. So we've got to have better food, but it's got to be more efficient. So that doesn't mean that we just have to have burgers and sausages. That means perhaps we're talking about new seeds or vertical farming or the way we transport our food, the whole supply chain. So I want to get into that, and from your vantage point, how you see things shifting. So my last thing I'll set up before I let you take the microphone. With Big Idea Ventures, you are spearheading the Generation Food Fund. Tell us what this is and why you think this is part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for having us on. So Generation Food really came out of the work that I did at Tyson around the supply chain of food. And certainly we did a lot of work around alternative proteins. But we also invested in food safety companies. We also invested in direct-to-consumer companies and traceability. And what sort of the thesis we came up with was, if you want to have impactful, wide-ranging, lasting change, you have to look at the entire food system. You can't just pick one little corner of it. And we can't talk about food without talking about agriculture. So you have to go all the way to the beginning of the source of the food. And that's whether it's animal agriculture or produce, vegetable-based agriculture. So the thought was, there needs to be a fund that focuses on driving sustainability solutions. Not vaporware, what we call in venture capital vaporware, which is software looking for a problem to solve. Someone comes up with a great idea, but no one actually took the time to say, does this solve a problem for the industry?
Why do we have this? Yes.
Exactly, exactly. Silicon Valley is great at coming up with solutions that consumers didn't realize they needed until they see it and they go, oh my God, I've been looking for this my entire life. iPhone as an example, AirPods as an example. We were fine with wired headphones until someone said you could have one with no wires. And now like, oh my God, I have to have these. And then there's industries that pop up all around these new technologies and multiple areas to invest and grow value for investors. We thought what wasn't being done was really growing those solution sets for sustainability, particularly around greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, plastics and packaging, and food loss and food waste. You talk to any chief sustainability officer at a big major food company, and those four challenges will be in their top five. So we picked those four and said, let's go invest capital at a Series A and later stage, where these companies need a little bit of capital to grow to a level where a big food company will say, I'm going to adopt that technology, right? When we were at Tyson and we looked at, call it hyperspectral imaging for inline speed viewing of product and catching anomalies, whether that's wood or plastic inclusions in product, right? X-rays is prevalent within the food industry, but if it's not metal, it's not going to get caught. So you're relying on the human eye, and people fatigue and things get missed. Sure. And that's where we had you see a lot of recalls in the industry. So we said, well, if we can use hyperspectral imaging, leverage vision technology, create an AI data lake, right? Make the machine smarter, better, and faster. That could be really interesting and cut down on food loss, food waste, and more importantly, keep food safe for consumers. The challenge is the volume demands are so intense and the production cycles are so tight that I couldn't shut down a plant for a day, install a system, and it not work, right? It has to work. It has to be unequivocally going to operate at full capacity. And that was the challenge we had. These technologies were still new. And it was, oh, we'd love to find a plant to pilot with and partner with. Like, that's nice, but it's not going to be us. So our thought was, let's create a fund that will allow those companies to grow and develop to the point where the food companies will say, yes, we're going to take on that technology. And that's important, whether it's plastics and packaging, whether it's water, food safety, or greenhouse gas emissions. So we created the Generation Food, what we're calling the Core Fund. We're targeting $250 million for that vehicle to invest in Series A and later stage investments in there. While we were exploring those pipeline of opportunities and getting smarter about the technology solution set that was out there, we started asking the question, where are these technologies coming from, right? Where are they being developed? Is it in industry? Is it corporate? Is it professional research consulting agencies? And the answer we kept coming to was universities. And that's where this cutting edge research was happening. So my colleague Abby Lyle and I, we went back to school and we got smart about what's going on at universities around research and development. And that's where the idea for our Generation Food Rural Partners Fund came from. So we're spinning up a new fund on that platform. It's partnering with right now 10 universities across the United States. And by across, I mean from Boston to Honolulu, Hawaii. And we're partnering with those schools to access their libraries of intellectual property in the areas of food, protein, and agriculture. And this fund will spin up new companies and commercialize that IP, create new businesses. And those businesses will be based in rural communities to help drive economic growth and development. So we're really excited about the great schools. I'm going to try and name them. It's in the press release that went on April 13th, but it's schools like North Carolina State University. Dean Rich Linton really spearheaded the effort there. He was our inaugural partner. But we also have Tufts, WPI, and UMass Amherst, which has the oldest food science program in the United States and perennially the best. Louisiana State University, which is one of the very few land grants, sea, air, and space grant universities, along with Hawaii, University of Hawaii. But we also have Penn State, Purdue, Illinois, powerhouse in the agronomy and engineering sectors, Oregon State, which is doing wonderful things in mariculture, algae. So really a great spread of schools in that partnership.
Yeah, so much to unpack here. First, I'll give you a tiny reminder that your camera is at the top of your computer screen so that I can see you the best. So yeah, let me look in your camera, please. Okay, so much. First of all, just a tad thing, just to go way back to the beginning of what you were saying. So AirPods and this thing, that's for the consumer. But here we're really talking about business to business investment. So you're talking about along the supply chain. I love that you mentioned all of these universities. We're not going to have them all here, but Tufts and U of I and Purdue and Louisiana. So you're not talking about the big cities. You're really talking about the rural areas where a lot of the food is made and a lot of the people are suffering from the lack of quality of food. So one of the problems that we're trying to solve, it could be quantity. I mean, we're running into that as, climate change takes away the arable land and you have more people. So you have less land, you have more people. Obviously, you have an issue there for feeding the world, but then also it's the quality of that food. And now hopefully we're going to be engineering for nutrients and not quantity, although maybe both. Anyways, so it's nice to see that these parts of the United States are being included in this conversation, because previously they really haven't been. It's been a sort of San Francisco and Brooklyn kind of situation.
Exactly, yeah, and you could throw Austin and Austin, Texas, and Boston, Mass in there as well. I think it's also important to point out, though, it's not only the climate change that's affecting the arable land, but it's also the industrial agriculture system that we've been using. Particularly right after World War II, the introduction of soil amendments, use of nitrogen in farming, the use of government subsidies, the entire agriculture system needs to be rethought. And this is one of the things that gets me into trouble sometimes with the plant-based movement of folks. So I'll try to be careful, but I don't like to not share my honest, true opinions.
No, do it. That's why we're here.
Animal agriculture is critical to regenerative agriculture on the land. You can't have healthy soil without an animal agriculture component. I'm not saying it should be in the style that we have today of feedlots, because that doesn't do the ground and the soil any good. But without the cattle, without having a grazing plan, it's hard to keep healthy soil. And without healthy soil, you can't grow enough produce to create enough protein to replace the animal protein supply. What we need to do is have a realistic conversation around there is an X amount of protein demand that needs to be met. And there has to be a plan for how are we going to do that? What portion of that is animal? What portion of that is seafood based? What portion is plant based? And what portion is cell based? That's why these new technologies are so critical, because we need them. we get so bogged down in the argument over this should be gone, that should be gone, this should be 20%, this should be 11%. We have much more near in critical issues to deal with around capacity, to your point around waste, right? Food waste is a massive issue, contributes to climate change. Almost a third of the food produced in the US doesn't make it off farms.
Yeah, it's
right.
yeah.
I mean, it is incredible to me that in a country where we have streaming on-demand video, we have children who go to bed hungry. It's just such a dichotomy. And so our teams are trying to do some things about that.
Yeah. So really hard to unpack all of this in an hour because basically we're changing the world right here today, Tom, you and me. So let's get into it.
That's it.
And I would gladly invite you to another conversation, maybe over wine, just so that we make sure we keep the tone right. But I know what you're saying about animal agriculture being regenerative. As I understand it, that is cattle only. So you can get rid of seafood and sheep and lambs. Okay. So let's talk about this. And
these are ecosystems, Elizabeth. They developed, right? The animal part of the ecosystems, whether it's the fish in the ocean, the flocks of chicken on the ground, or the lambs or the cattle, they all developed and were fine until we screwed with the balance. That's the problem.
Well, okay, now that's a different question. I think you're talking about industrial farming and how that has changed the landscape and commercial fishing, let's say, and how that has changed the landscape of the seas. But you couldn't feed the world on any sort of quantity that would make sense if you left it to just individual fishing, let's say, and not commercial fishing, or, individual the number of cows that you need to regenerate the soil wouldn't be enough quantity to feed the world.
I think we need to come back into balance. When you talk to economists, they'll have the same argument, right? You have schools of money supply and you have schools of demand supply economic theory. What they'll tell you in practice is the best is a mix of both, bringing them together in moderation. And that's what we need to get back to. Because if you do away with industrial animal farming and you're going to use plant-based ingredients to feed everyone protein, you need an industrial size plant agriculture system to replace all the protein that you're going to need. So you're creating yet another problem. You're trying to solve a problem and creating yet another one out of it. We need to find the proper balance and the proper techniques so that we don't have the same conversation 30 years down the road. Like, oh, now the soil is denuded of all nutrients. What are we going to do? Let's go to Mars. Like, that's not going to work.
Right. Although, we're not talking about, we haven't gotten into this yet, but we haven't talked about the monocropping that we have today and how crop rotation would address what you're talking about in terms of detrimental soil. So yes, doing anything just for the sole goal of eking out everything it has and not replenishing it will kill it, no matter what we're talking about. Doubt. So, and that has kind of been the process of going forward, like we were saying, quantity over efficiency for the food supply system. So, like I say, maybe this conversation is better had over a glass of wine again in front of the camera, but I'm not down 100%, but I know what you're trying to say. But it's not just because I'm vegan. It's just because I'm not sure that you could do any sort of quantity. Like, let's say you didn't have an emotional or a moral issue with it. I'm not sure you get the quantity that you'd need. You're still going to have to shift the supply system. If you just let the animals do their thing in their own way and then killed them off, you wouldn't have the quantity you needed. So, okay, but let's shift a little bit because I want people to understand sort of the grandeur that we're talking about, because we're really talking about changing absolutely everything along the way. So what kind of change are you seeing, let's say, in seeds and cropping? And when I say cropping, I guess if we shift to multi-cropping and so no longer monocropping, then you're talking about building different machines to pick those crops. Because right now the machines go down the line and they corn. But what if you have corn next to eggplant? I'm not a farmer. I'm sure that doesn't work. But, let's say you have variety in there. You need different kind of machines. So like everything has to get fixed. What are you seeing in that basic where we start the food equation, seeds and soil?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing a lot of innovation in ag, and I think it's starting to come out of the typically ag innovation was looked at, let's create something that Bayer or a Monsanto or a John Deere or Cat will buy. And I think we're starting to see a shift away from that and seeing there is value in things like plant microbiome. So there's some amazing research that we've seen out of universities that look at how do plants fight off pest infestations? How do we harness that technology and get it to trigger faster so we don't lose any crops? How do we look at that idea of crop rotation? How do we look at creating almost custom crops, but not genetically engineered crops, traditionally raised? Let's figure out which species need to be crossbred and put them in the field. It takes a little bit longer. But you don't have that genetic engineering overhang for that product. And we're seeing a lot in the area of water. We firmly believe that the next world wars are going to be fought over resources like food and water. We are quickly moving towards a drought situation in the western states in the US. And the predictions are all that it's only going to get worse as it continues. And part of that's the denuding of the soil, because dry dirt doesn't hold moisture, it runs off.
It also gives off carbon.
And it gives off carbon
because
there's no root systems. That's how the carbon's sequestered, as the roots grow into the ground. And so if you just have plain dirt, there's nothing there. And soil absorbs water, dirt runs it off.
Right.
And that's where you also get cross-contamination in fields. So we need to work. There's some fascinating company out of Norway called Desert Control, just went public in Norway, using nano clay and really fluid dynamics coming out of the oil and gas industry. And they've created a technology that can create arable soil out of arid dirt in a short amount of time. Fascinating business.
Wow.
I mean, game-changing when you talk about if we can not only reclaim those Great Plains states that have gone to dirt, I'll use dirt versus soil, that have gone to dirt, but also desert lands. Can we create those carbon sinks out of that? That's really incredible technology.
Yeah. Again, so much to unpack here when you're talking about like the soil not holding water and the water running off. You're also talking about chemical runoff. So and manure runoff, and that's why you have these large factory farms.
Romaine recalls.
Yes, right. That's why you have romaine recalls that comes from the feces that are running off through the water. And when you mention harnessing air, if I'm understanding this right, the technology to harness air to rejuvenate that soil, that is grossly an overstatement. Did I understand that right?
Oh, no, not air. So it's using clay and soil and water and some nutrients to create soil, basically, out of dirt.
I see. Okay. So it's to create a healthy soil.
Yes.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So who is making these technologies? Now, you mentioned all these universities and they're your partners. Is that where it's all starting, or are you seeing startups and entrepreneurs hit this as well?
So the ones that are truly science are coming out of research that are done at universities and that are popping out and either getting some grant funding, some alumni investment fund funding, some tech transfer offices are doing a great job at finding corporations. Some corporates will endow research as well. At several universities and try and find an opportunity there to commercialize some intellectual property. The problem is, if it doesn't fit exactly what they're looking for, they're going to shelve it. They're not going to, because they paid for the research. Our fund can now come in and say, we will pay you for that because we see an application for it in industry.
I see. And so that's why you're working so closely with universities. Yeah. It's to harness that knowledge, if you will, but it's also to encourage it, to maybe speed up the process of getting it done. Okay, I see.
Absolutely. We've told the universities, we expect to be a marketing tool for you to attract younger faculty. That of all the universities, I have no idea how many there are in the US, but of all let's say there's 1,000 universities in the US, we have 10. We are one of 10 universities out of 1,000 that have this commercialization program. That's going to attract people who are looking for a new home to conduct some research. It'll attract grant funding. It'll attract research funding. It'll attract NSF grants. Like, look, these people can actually turn this research into something commercially viable.
Yes. So if you're a talented individual, you want to go where your ideas are actually going to see the light of day.
Exactly.
I'll just comment that you were saying you really believe that wars are going to be fought over water and food. I made that exact case to the New York Times. I've submitted that article. They have not run it yet. And I would agree that veg tech is an issue of national security. So this idea of innovating companies through technology, changing our food supply system so it can be more prolific and have more quality, generate more nutritional food. And that, as we saw through the pandemic, you saw how quickly the food supply system fell apart, really. And
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just, so I wrote a LinkedIn blog, and then John Tyson wrote an article. Of course, John Tyson's article got picked up nationally.
Darn it. Yeah, all right. Well, I should have just put mine on LinkedIn. Okay. Well, yeah.
But it was basically, our food system has devolved into such a just-in-time inventory system of delivering product to meet demand, and it's so broad that it was stretched extremely thin. Right. And to my point earlier around not being able to shut down a plant to install a new piece of technology, that's because those deliveries have to be met. And we saw what happened, right? Rationing of protein in the grocery store, rationing of toilet paper, paper towel, things I never thought I would see, let alone my kids would see. We saw. So it's not that I agree with your article and your thesis, because it's not that hard to see a leap for a country like Singapore. Or even a state like Hawaii, which are both over 90% dependent on imports to feed their people. If all of a sudden that valve is shut off because of borders being closed, which we've seen borders closed, right? Malaysia and Indonesia provide most of the food for Singapore. Those borders close again and exports don't flow and imports don't come in, you're going to have a populace that's hungry. And that's why Singapore has a 30 by 30 initiative to become 30% food independent by 2030. And it's something we all need to be paying more attention to.
Well, I referenced Singapore, of course, in my article, and I think it is very interesting also that the U.S. isn't investing in this research like they should. And we can talk about, Israel's doing a great job. I think it's sort of mimicking, or perhaps you're mimicking Israel, and that they're working with universities. And sorry, it's very fair.
No, that's okay.
No one mentioned it.
I will give Israel their due when it's due, and it's certainly due there. They do an amazing job of commercialization of IP. Yep.
Everybody listening to this podcast, you must now sign an NDA. But Israel has done a great job of, government funding universities and entrepreneurs, and those three things working together, which is sort of what you're doing here, but kind of minus the government funding. And it makes me mad that I speak for the US, other countries are investing more in cellular agriculture and looking more to the future. And COVID was such a smack in the face. It wasn't even like a learning lesson. It was like a punch in the face. How could you miss it? And I just don't see us really ramping up there like we should. So, the Boston Consulting Group, which was paid for by Blue Horizons Ventures, that was one of the things they were talking about as well, is that for us really to see price parity in a shifting food supply system so that everything isn't so expensive, you're going to have to see governments get on board. And this podcast is an invitation for the U.S. to do the same. Okay, so I want to get to some of the other things that are happening in the supply chains. We talked at the very basic level. We were talking about seeds and monocropping versus other things. But what about novel ingredients? So we still haven't even made it to the hamburger or the sausage. Let's just get to like the novel ingredients.
We're getting closer.
What are you seeing there happening that's new?
Yeah, certainly. So as more and more large brands are coming onto the scene in the alternative protein space, you have Smithfield, you have JBS, you have Tyson, et cetera. They're putting the screws really to the pea protein and to the soy protein market. So we're starting to see prices increasing. We're starting to see demand go through the roof, but also the demand for innovative ingredients are expanding. So we're seeing more interesting things around mung and other pulses and legumes. We're seeing more and more on the duckweed space. I still don't fully understand duckweed, but I'm getting smarter about it. So for us as investors, let's put that set of glasses on for a second. Brands are extremely hard. Trying to launch a brand, and all the entrepreneurs out there are sighing. They're like, "Tell me something I don't know, Tom."
You mean a B2C brand?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So those are extremely difficult to launch, because you not only have to create a really great product, you have to create a connection with the consumer. And that's why direct DTC e-commerce is such a great tool, because you can create that great, exactly, and you can identify quickly. The challenge is when you want to go broad, meaning raise a large amount of capital, everyone's going to say, how do you get into food service? That's great, you have e-com. How do you get into consumer? How do you get into retail? How do you get into food service? And to that, you need scale. And that's where the big food companies, I use the analogy of, I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. As a big food company, I don't have to win, I just have to wait until you run out of money. And I have so many other ancillary lines of revenue that I can afford to have a loss leader. Right? I can artificially price my product at parity or even lower, especially lower than yours, little startup brand. And I already own a lot of the slotting in the grocery store. So I just take my product out for a week, I put mine in, I price it at $1 below yours. And after a while, people are going to grab mine. Just because consumers in the US, the majority of retail consumers in the US are driven by value and brand identity. It's not, you go to Europe, much more sustainability focused. They identify with that mission. It's ingrained in their culture. Here in the US, we're much more around legacy brands always carry more weight and value when you're doing retail shopping. And I don't like, people do these polls all the time. Are you willing to pay more for sustainably sourced? People say yes. There's a whole psychology around how people answer survey questions, and they sort of give answers they think they should be giving. Of course, I'd pay more for sustainability stuff, and then they go buy the plastic bags from the store because they're cheaper. We need to find a way to bring those products to parity. Now, to your point about price parity, it's kind of a misnomer to talk about alternative proteins being at price parity with traditional animal proteins because it's a subsidized industry. 100%. So you're right. So the alternative protein folks are already playing with one arm tied behind their back, because you're not only fighting the scale of these big food companies, but you're fighting the subsidies that the farmers and the ranchers get on that. Now, I'm not saying they aren't necessary and they're not a useful tool. They are. What I'm saying is, to your point, if we want to encourage, if USDA and the other federal agencies are serious about encouraging alternative protein research and expanding the food supply, et cetera, we need to put everyone on the same playing field, right? So it's either take those subsidies and spread them out evenly amongst all the players and give everyone a fighting chance, or end the subsidies for the animal protein industry and then let them fight on a fair ground. My fear around cell-based agriculture, it's not really a fear, it's a theory I've been telling folks, is I don't understand why people don't think at some point large national governments like China would one day just turn on the subsidy faucet and all of a sudden Chinese cell-based protein is a fraction of what animal-based protein is. People say, well, that'll never happen. Like, well, the US government subsidizes the heck out of the agriculture industry. Why wouldn't China do it to cell-based, or why wouldn't Singapore do it for cell-based? They've already allowed it from a regulatory perspective.
So we're back to go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
We're back to veg tech as a question of national security. Of course, whoever controls the food has all the power. And I don't want to make this about politics, but if I were a politician, and thank God I'm not, that's exactly what I'd be doing. I'd be looking at controlling all the food. Well, who's going to do that? The person who's the most susceptible. Right now, China, could never feed itself at 1.4 billion people. It's got to get a handle on its food, because if you have someone in office who's messing with your trade regulations, et cetera, you realize that you can't have a successful trade negotiation if that person controls your food. You can't do anything with the person who controls your food.
I don't care about cars. I don't care about electronics. I care about food, and I care about water. And you're right. The people who control those will control the world. And that's why I think we are not far off from seeing wealthy countries divert money to that purpose of promoting their own food systems. I mean, we haven't had a new food policy in the US, I think, since the Eisenhower administration. And hopefully the current administration, things have changed since then. Twinkies aren't good for you. You shouldn't eat a whole box of them. As if we needed to be told that, but apparently that, and don't eat Tide Pods, right? We need to tell people that.
Can I just go back for a second, because you were talking about the big guy squishing the little guy. So it's one of my favorite phrases for entrepreneurs. It's not who's the smartest. It's not who's the prettiest. It's not even who you know. It's who's willing to work the hardest and who can make their money last the longest. Yep. So when somebody like JBS buys up Vivera, which just happened this week, I feel okay about it. Again, I'm in this for the moral as well as the business reasons. So, part of me says like, oh gosh, I want that little brand to make it. But then I say like, no, I want those distribution channels. And even more than anything, because with my company, Plant Powered Consulting, I'm really on the marketing media end. I want those ad budgets, because when JBS decides that they're going to buy Vivera, they have to advertise it. And pretty soon it's manly to eat plants. So I want that ad budget spend as much as I want the distribution.
Yeah, I think what's was really interesting about that transaction, real quick, was the size of it, right? So if you look at Beyond went public at $1.5 billion, first trade was almost 50% higher than, or 100% higher than that. When you look at the purchase price that JBS paid for Rivera, it's less. Right. And one of the things we talked about was you're going to see big food companies start to buy these alternative protein companies earlier than they typically would. Typically, big food companies will wait till see 9 figures worth of revenue, significant geographic distribution, broad adoption by product. I think what we're going to start seeing is a shift towards, okay, we're going to buy earlier into the growth curve, because by the time they reach what is typical M&A critical mass, it's too expensive to buy them, right? Impossible has to go public at this point. There's no food company on the planet that can purchase without issuing debt to buy a negative EBITDA business, and none of the publicly traded ones will do that. Maybe Cargill could do it.
Which is private.
But they're probably the only ones who could do it, and it doesn't really fit their product portfolio.
No, it wouldn't make sense.
So they're not. So what you've now done is limited the exit opportunity for that business, where it only has sort of one route to successful exit. As a venture investor, I don't like that, right? I want optionality on the table. So I think we're going to start to see not only the big companies get interested in it, but the VCs that are funding these companies are going to be pushing for earlier exits.
This is so interesting to me, because taking a step back from the consumer perspective, a lot of people think that, maybe they want a food supply system because it's vegans yelling on the street, or, the tree huggers who want the environmental thing. It's not. It's actually the businesses that have just on the back of a napkin. The math is pretty simple. We don't have enough land and water to make the food we need with the system we have. We need a new food system. What's driving change the most is actually the businesses. And so it doesn't surprise me that they're wanting to get in earlier, to get it cheaper, and to just be part of the game faster. I remember when I first met you, this would have been September of 2019 at the Good Food Institute conference in September. And I remember when JBS sat on that stage, pretty smug, actually, saying like, yeah, we're not sure. We're gonna sit this one out for now. When we get in, we'll get in big, but we really don't see the need to do it now. Fast forward a year and a half, and they're I guess they've given notice. They're in.
They just wrote a big check. Yeah,
they just wrote a big check. Yeah. So very interesting. Pretty quickly, I would say that's a pretty quick change. Yeah. Okay, I don't want to belabor this, but I'm kind of working my way through the supply chain. So we talked about some novel ingredients. I would actually say at this point that pea and soy, I'm not going to call them novel. I'm going to say yep, they're kind of old hat. You mentioned some things, mung bean and duckweed. What are you seeing come out ahead? What's the protein du jour, if you will?
So the ones that mung is getting a lot of traction. The ones that I think will succeed a lot will be the ones that don't require a lot of flavor masking. Right. That's one of the big knocks. Is I remember I was doing a talk at the cow calf cattle conference in Ottumwa, Iowa, and I talked all about alternative proteins. I made it out alive. No, it's great. It was a great conference, and actually met some great folks from Iowa State there. But one of the things we talked about was this concept of 33 ingredients on one label and beef has one, right? And all that. I said, well, look, it is a processed food. And I think Impossible just did a bit about why processed food doesn't always have to be bad. But there is something to be said around the healthiness, right? We talked about this food's healthier for you. And I don't really know if today's iteration of plant-based protein is actually good for you. I'm not a food scientist. I'm not a nutritionist, so I can't say that.
I can answer if you'd like, because I've interviewed so many doctors.
From a cholesterol perspective, from an inflammation perspective, absolutely. There are certain things that plant-based protein is missing. We can, of course, add those like B12. There are issues around sodium levels, but again, it's all around balancing your diet. If you want to consume that, then you drop off something else and you can get to the same aggregate number for the day. But I think really it's around the flavorings, and a lot of those ingredients are there to sort of mask afternotes of protein, of the base protein. So if we can get to source proteins that don't require such a large amount of masking, that are more adoptive of the flavors that they're mixed with, that they take on sauces better, et cetera, I think then you have a chance at getting that list down. There are companies like Real Bite, No Evil. They do a great job with a minimal ingredient panel.
Yeah, barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much to unpack here. I'd like to respond to that if I could, just because I've interviewed so many doctors. So, I don't think anybody thinks Beyond Meat is a carrot. You buy it, it comes in a package. You say to yourself, this is not lettuce. So you know
Right.
that going in. And Beyond Meat 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, each time they get better on sodium and each time they get better, and that's hard for meat, right? Because meat is what it is. And if you don't like it, you've got A1 steak sauce. That's kind of your option there. So here, luckily, we've got technology and we're changing that. So I think you're going to see a lot of cleaner labels. That's something the consumer is asking for and everyone's listening to. You're going to hear, tastier, price, convenience. It always comes down to these things. So this is a scale that is changing, which is wonderful. But also, if you just had to compare like label to label, you do have things like, yes, no cholesterol with the plant-based option. And you also have no TMNAO, so trimethylene N oxide. So that's something that's a great benefit. And then you don't have hormones and antibiotics. And depending on how the product is made, I think you're going to see plant-based options, again, changing in time because there's that innovation that can happen, have higher fiber. So meat has no fiber. I actually didn't know that. You look at it, you think it's got to have fiber. It's so thick. Like, how could it not have fiber?
Right?
It's fibrous, right? But meat has no fiber. Yeah. So, but no one thinks it's a carrot. It's not. Yeah. So I think there's anyways, a good conversation to have around that. But and I forget what else we were talking about. So I'm going to move on to, are you seeing a lot of blended proteins come through? Because I agree, you got to mask that taste. Like pea has kind of a taste you're always working with. So are you seeing blended come through?
We're seeing more ideas around blended when it comes to plant and cell-based protein. That seems to be an emerging area, sort of a way to not only get the cost of cell-based for the consumer down by mixing it with plant-based, but also as a way to get cell-based into the conversation.
Right.
When I was at Tyson, my partner Reese and I, we always talked about plant-based being the gateway for cell-based, getting people okay with the idea of eating protein from a different source, and then eventually moving on to the actual true game changer, which we still think will be cell-based protein well into the future. So blended is interesting. Again, a lot of it's going to be around consumer and consumer adoption. And it's yet to be, there are a few brands who are out there using animal-based protein and plant-based protein, didn't do terribly well. We're seeing them come off the market. People are still sort of purists around plant-based or animal-based.
Yeah, it's interesting. From the brands that I talk to and the ones that I work with, they're all, they want to get rid of soy. They want to get rid of pea. They want to get rid of wheat, obviously gluten.
Yeah.
Mung beans not doing it for them. Rapeseed's not doing it for them. They're having trouble. Lupin isn't doing it. Hemp is coming up as a positive player potentially. It also has some good ramifications for the soil if done correctly. Duckweed, I haven't heard too much in the conversation. Pigeon pea, are you hearing that at all?
No.
Me too. Okay. So I'm seeing people go a little bit with blended, because then they don't have to lean so heavily on soy and pea. They can say like blended ancient grains. And, so there's some of that labeling that comes into it.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. So now we're moving again to the supply chain. So let's say you've got your ingredients, they've come to you and you're looking at some novel technologies. I talk about this a lot on the show, so we won't stay here a long time, but you're talking about plant-based proteins. You're talking about fermented precision fermentation, and cell-based. So how much precision fermentation are you seeing take over the market? I'm seeing it move super fast as a big player.
Yeah. We're seeing a lot of it. And I think in the past month, we've probably been on about 12 calls around precision fermentation deals. It's really taking off, and not only on the startup side, but on the corporate side. So our LPs are really interested in it. We have a lot of strategic LPs in our first fund, the New Protein Fund. We just recently closed that round. So we're seeing a lot of precision fermentation, and not only on the dairy side, but also on the meat protein side.
That'll be interesting. Now you're talking about companies like Nature's Find, which is doing biomass fermentation. So not really precision fermentation, but biomass fermentation to produce meat, which I've tried.
Yeah. They're talking about that. Clara, Super Brood.
Clara, Super Brood. Yeah, really exciting. And then, of course, as we were talking about before, cellular agriculture. I do have high hopes for that blend of cultured meat, cellular, or excuse me, the cellular fat, cultured
Mm-hmm.
fat, and working its way into plant-based and maybe helping there. Although, then you are getting rid of the health benefits little by little, but you still have no TMAO, all that stuff. Okay, so then you put together your product, and I know you're working on packaging, and that is a big problem, particularly during COVID when the whole world did takeout. So talk to me about the innovations in packaging.
Packaging is a significant challenge. We're not only looking at it from an innovative materials perspective, and this is my problem with a lot of venture is we look at a problem set. In this case, it's packaging. Like, well, plastic is evil, and we have to get rid of plastic. We created a recycling system. We don't really use it. I know I put my stuff out in the blue bins. Like tonight, I'll put my blue bins out on the curb, and tomorrow morning the glass truck will come at 5 a.m. and the cardboard guys will come at noon, and off it goes. The problem is the downstream market for those products, particularly the stuff that comes out of recycling those products, is so de minimis. It doesn't even really pay for the energy to run the machines to do it. A few years ago, China stopped buying our trash, and the price for PCR cardboard dropped to $100 a ton. So you have a massive amount of this cardboard that we were shipping overseas for really good value because they were using it, I don't know for what, but they were using it for something. Now they've stopped buying it, and they haven't started up buying it again. On the recycling side, there's a lot of organic material. So let's take a traditional meat tray, right? EPS, polystyrene, petroleum-based meat tray that you buy in any grocery store. Well, maybe not you, but a consumer will buy in a grocery store. Those are actually recyclable. So if you turn them over, I suggest doing it over the sink. Otherwise, the purge that's in the tray, that's all that liquid will fall on your floor, and then you yell at Tom and go through a bunch of Clorox wipes.
Darn that, Tom.
Do it over a sink. But on the back, you'll see the recycling triangle. It can be recycled. The problem is a lot of the waste haulers can't handle the organic material that's on there, so it just gets landfilled anyway, right? And the U.S. will produce about 4 billion of those a year, just in the U.S. So there are some fascinating companies that are creating innovative materials that will address that problem. I was on a panel at Future Food Tech talking about packaging, and I asked the head of packaging at Mondelez, and I said, are we at the point now as brands where we should just give up on the consumer and say, look, we've given you recyclable, we've given you compostable, and you can't be trusted, right? We're just going to make everything biodegradable. So wherever it ends up, it's just going to fall back into and he was making arguments around, well, that's just GHG emissions, et cetera. But it's interesting because there's a whole CapEx, fully built out system to handle this material, and we're not leveraging it to its capacity. There's a great little company in Australia called Grounded Packaging, and they'll work with brands, and the brands will go to them and say, I need packaging that'll do X, Y, and Z. I need it to withstand frozen cold chain, go through a microwave, and be recyclable, compostable, biodegradable. And they'll put it into their proprietary algorithm and come up with a list of existing materials that they can work with their partner manufacturers to create you a product that does exactly what you need it to do. Far more capital efficient than trying to create a brand new product from scratch, or brand new a coating or some other product from scratch. A great company in Arizona called Footprint, using molded fiber technology that creates true compostable, biodegradable, fiber-based packaging. Conagra is one of their biggest customers. So really, there are a lot of different companies attacking it from different directions. Footprint is buying that excess Chinese garbage now and using that as their feedstock. So they're benefiting from that market. Then we're seeing things like companies like Tippa, companies like Salutum, both out of Israel, that are working on the plastic wrap portion of food, right? When we think about a tray pack, it's not only the tray, it's also the plastic wrap that goes over the top, right? What do we do with that? How do we create that? Is it a bioplastic? Should it be algae-based? There was a researcher out of England, who went to a fish factory and was taking the discarded fish scales and was creating a plastic-like material. Fascinating technology. Again, very expensive, right? An innovative material. It's going to take a lot to apply that. Is there a way to leverage what we already have and actually recycle more than almost the single-digit % of things that actually get recycled? in the country. It's kind of a myth about recycling in the US. It's not as broad as we think it is.
So for me, there are two issues here. One is
Mhm.
education. So I find that there's very little education on how to recycle. So I often
Yeah.
find myself saying, what
Uh-huh.
does this make
Which
it?
one does
Is
this go into?
is,
Yeah.
or is it like, and I'm trying and I just learned that, let's say you have a, soda pop something or other, you can do the bottle but not the cap, but who would know? Who would tell you that the cap is a different kind of plastic and
Right.
it can't be recycled? You just don't know these things. So that's very disappointing, that the program went out without any real education.
Mhm.
And then I take your disappointment in the public, I see you and I raise you. Sometimes I just think, well, are we giving up on humanity as a whole? Because, all these things that we're trying to do to rectify the situation, there's
Mhm.
just too many people.
Yeah.
Just too many people. Yeah.
It's an enormous challenge. I mean, when you look at the fact that Easter Island, an uninhabited part of the world, has some of
Right.
the highest concentrations of plastic waste around it.
Could you just kill yourself?
It's just mind-boggling to me. The fact that we have a recycling system and we really don't leverage it because we're not creating a downstream market for it's very much sustainability theater, and that's what I'm afraid. We talk about innovation theater all the time in corporate around, companies saying they're going to innovate, create new products, right? And a different flavor chip is not innovation. That's product line expansion. Okay, let's be honest with each other. But at the same time, talking about sustainability and saying I'm going to reduce X by Y date, I'm going to reduce A by B date. Well, those dates are now coming due, right? You have the 30 by 30 folks. It's coming. The 25 by 25 folks coming even faster. And I've yet to see anyone say, oh yeah, we're crushing it on our sustainability goals, right? We were going to be 30% down by 2030. We're already at 20% and we got 9 more years to go. We're going to blow it out of the park. Yeah. Nobody's talking about it because the technologies don't really exist at scale to be implemented. And one of the things I talked about on this panel was, as long as companies are, and I was moderating, so I got to poke the rattlesnake a little bit, which is fun. Usually I'm answering questions. I have to be careful about how I answer them. Here I was just throwing bombs out. But it was, at what point do we say companies are no longer incentivized on just quarterly results, right? But they're also going to be consumers, investors are going to value companies based on how they act vis-a-vis the environment and the climate. And until we get to that point, and BlackRock's starting to do it, Blackstone's starting to do it, Goldman's starting to do it. And I know this because when I went out to Iowa to do that talk, the farmers were worried that their loans were going to start getting called because they weren't going to lend to carbon heavy industries anymore. And animal agriculture was being hit with the carbon heavy or GHG positive media blitz. They were sincerely worried. They're like, you work in New York. When is Goldman going to pull my loans? I'm like, I don't know those group of bankers. I couldn't answer that question. I said, but they like their steak. So trust me, last time I met a banker, I haven't met many bankers who don't like to go to a steakhouse. So I know the vegan bankers are going to hate me now, but the stereotype pretty much holds. So I think you're safe for now. But the truth is, until we hold their feet to the fire and say, we're not going to value your company as highly as we used to because you're not being good stewards, I don't know how we solve the problem.
Okay, so again, so much to unpack here. First of all, I'll say, and again, hitting a little bit of a negative note, I'm sorry, but picking up what I was saying before, sometimes I wonder if we're going for the Darwin Award because we have ESG investing and then we're putting companies like Chevron in it and saying, well, it's okay. They kind of are looking forward towards the environment, but they're not. No one's holding their feet to the fire. They're just giving them a label. You and I are going to have a glass of wine because we have lots to talk about respectfully with each other. But, the certified humane labels don't even get me started. So an ESG might be going down the same path. So we have the tools to hold people's feet to the fire, to demand real change for ourselves, by the way. We're not doing it for anyone else. We're doing it for our own kids. Right. Yeah, we're not doing it. Just like we're not recycling. This is why I say, well, my gosh, maybe we're up for that Darwin Award and should get it. I don't know. And then I'll say to those bankers, I have got your plant-based steak. So plant-based steak is on the market. I work with a company called Juicy Marbles. So, you can have your steak and eat it too. But you give me a great segue because I told you in advance that we might be talking about banking. So the last stop, if you will, on the supply chain How is banking going to change? And it's going to have to change, because banking is one of those things that could hold people's feet to the fire. Like right now, we are actually a detriment to you doing organic farming, because we want to see huge yields so that we know we're going to get paid back. So we actually want to see chemicals. If there was a way, and it would have to work economically in their benefit, obviously, but if there's a way to turn that equation around where the reverse is true, we won't lend unless we know you're doing proper care in your business. Yep. I think it would be a really big start to shifting the monster, if you will. Do you see banking changing? It's going to have to, or the conversation is sort of pointless.
Yeah, I don't know. What you've done though is given me a great idea. What I think might be a great idea for a spin up business is taking a small amount of capital and creating a proper ag bank that sort of invests along those guidelines, and do it as a case study, as a pilot, and let's see how those farms perform vis-a-vis the other farms that aren't following those regulations or following that mantra, and then take that to the banks. Literally take it to the bank.
I was going to say, we're taking it to the bank on the Plant-Based Business Hour.
Take it to the bank and say, look, we've done this in real life. We took $50 million, we put it into a bank. We lent to farms that promised to operate in a certain way. We held them to standards. We did check-ins. We did audits. They followed it, and this is their profitability level. Wouldn't you like to see this at your scale and see what happens?
I would love to be involved with that in any way that I can be helpful or what have you. It's not the first time that an idea has been
sprung up on the show.
Has sprung up on the show. You're not the first person to say, I'm going to take that idea and do something. I would love to be involved in that. I believe in it passionately. Banks are a big part of this equation from where I sit. So could be very interesting. And I think there's money to be made on sustainability. That's what kills me. And corporations get it. Corporations are seeing that, actually they're going to make more money in plant-based because of the economics, not because of the morale, but because of land and water and things like this and how it's all changing. And I'll just do a little plug. Thank God for millennials and Gen Z. They also get it. So the consumer is obviously a big part of this equation as well. Okay. So you were the chief financial officer of Tyson Ventures. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you about chicken. So let's do that. I was in Bhutan hiking on a trail, not many Americans around, and I bump into an engineer who's working at Kargil in Thailand on vacation. He's from Minneapolis or something. And he and I just start chatting on the trail together, and we have a long talk about chicken. So some of the things he said that Kargil was doing, this would have been December of 2018. Some of the things that Kargil was doing was fascinating. He was saying, it used to be that we would have to really present a case to get funded. Now we mention the word sustainability, we get funded right away for anything we want to do. They said, so again, we'll have a conversation over wine. They got rid of all their ranching cows. They saw that was inefficient and not of value. So they got rid of all that, but they doubled down on chicken, and they were trying to develop kelp as food for chicken. And they were trying to, he was an engineer, re-engineer how they could get more out of chicken that they're already getting out of chicken. Yeah. So in many ways, it was an optimistic conversation. And in many ways, it was a disappointing conversation. I wondered if you could share your thoughts on chicken consumption.
So I think chicken consumption, protein consumption globally continues to increase. Demand is projected, I think, to double by 2050.
Yep.
And again, we go back to there's a bar graph of demand that needs to be filled, and what portion is relative to each protein. Chicken's an interesting one because we haven't seen it really do well on the alternative protein side, because chicken's already considered to be a healthier protein, right? When you say I'm going to go on a diet, what are you going to eat? Broccoli and grilled chicken. So it already has sort of a health halo to it. Cell-based chicken, I think, is more interesting for me than plant-based chicken, just in terms of the market size and the demand for it. You and I mentioned in the pre-call about Tyson this week opened up its first greenfield plant in 25 years in Humboldt, down in Tennessee. Large facility, and I think what that shows is they project demand to continue to increase for the traditional poultry product. In terms of the work we used to talk about feed conversion ratios all the time, right? That's the secret sauce. That's how much protein can you get out of the feed, and how do you maximize that in terms of value for the product. Tray pack, what we call tray pack, your traditional protein is a very slim margin business. And I'm not giving away any industry secrets here. The more a company does to a food in terms of further processing, the more margin there is, the more value it is, right? So that's why a box of breakfast sausage sandwiches costs twice what a tray of chicken breast costs, because a lot more has gone into that product.
Right.
So when you're talking about a slim single-digit margin business, you have to maximize your inputs. You don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. It's all about cost management. Pennies matter, and that includes on packaging. When you talk about the trays, they'll cost around 3 pennies a piece. But when you're talking about 900 million of them a year, that's a lot of pennies. They add up. So saying, oh, it only costs a penny more, it's like, yeah, but it costs 900 million pennies more. And Kroger doesn't want to pay for it, or I don't mean to pick on them, but any grocer doesn't want to pay for it, because they'll say the consumer doesn't want to pay for it. Even though in those surveys they say they will pay for it, when you actually put it in front of them, they tend not to pay for it. So on the poultry side, I think we'll continue to see demand and capacity increase. I think you'll see, on the we don't like to call it the engineering of chickens, right? But there are various size birds for various purposes. You have small bird, you have big bird businesses. Costco sells their chickens. This is famous. They're famous for selling their roasted chickens at a loss, right? That is a loss leader product for them. It's a way to get people into the store and spend a lot of money. I know we go into Costco and we can go, oh, let's go pick up a chicken for dinner. And we walk out with, $400 worth of stuff. They've more than made up for that chicken on the back end. So in a way, the chicken is used as a marketing tool to get customers into the store. So as long as it continues to be an affordable protein, I think you'll continue to see demand expand. Now, as avian flus expand, right? We saw ASF in China wipe out the equivalency of the U.S. hog population. So China lost about half its hog population due to African swine fever. Yeah, a couple years ago. That's the equivalent of us losing the entire U.S. hog population. If you see something like that, but on the poultry side, come to the U.S.,
which we have.
We have. We just haven't seen it take out entire flocks, entire groups of birds.
Please go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I thought we saw 340,000 turkeys be killed just last year, last year in North Carolina because of avian bird flu. Is that not right?
I don't know. And while that number may seem like a lot, it's not. When you think about the size. Like a company like a Tyson, and this is in their investor facts book, they'll process 37 million chickens a week.
God almighty.
So the scale, like when you talk about, oh, that's 1 million pounds of product were recalled, it's actually not a lot. It's like 10 tractor trailers worth of product. So just the scale of the food system, and I had no appreciation for this before I worked at Tyson. And working there was a tremendous opportunity to learn about our food system. Yeah. You have no appreciation for the size and scale of it until you're in it. And you actually see what it takes to feed a country, let alone the entire world. But we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And you're just talking about what it's like to feed maybe the US. And again, we're back to China with its numbers of 1.4 billion, which is why you are seeing meat consumption go up globally. You were talking about protein, but of course we get protein from plants. Plants are the original source of protein. All scientists will tell you that protein does not come from animals or humans. It comes only from plants and microbes. So protein consumption is going up. But I think what you really mean there is that meat consumption is going up. I'll just respond. As your host here, I wanted to let you say everything that you had to say. I'll just respond and say, subsidies fuels that business. So that's very frustrating when I think of chemical runoff. And I also think of the health implications, and I think of pandemics. And so that puts me back into are we up for the Darwin Award and actually trying to win it? Because we've just gone through a pandemic. We're still in it. There's nothing that says you can only have one pandemic at a time. You might have several pandemics at a time. In fact, we do, right? Because we have African swine fever. I'm speaking globally now. We still do have avian bird flu. Yeah. You can look to China. They've never really been able to squash that. That is a consistent thing that is running there. And then of course, coronavirus. And then you have all these variations of coronavirus. So, when you're talking about millions of things that are, we've been drummed into our head, we must social distance. So there are about 7 billion people on the planet. There are about 70 billion land animals that we slaughter just every year. Are they social distancing? No, we're forcing them to, be butt to beak. Literally, their butts are in their beaks because they're on top of each other. Well, you're never going to outrun a pandemic when 90% of the living, breathing, so it's just, we're back to, it's very frustrating to hear, very sad to hear, but I agree with you. I think it's going up. I don't want to live in a plant-based bubble. I think chicken consumption's going up. Seafood consumption, I think, might be going up, but that's only until, again, Darwin Award, we kill off the entire ocean and then it can't go up because we've done it to ourselves. I would really like to see subsidies turn around and governments get with the program. But okay, I do believe in the entrepreneur first. So I'm excited about all the technology you're talking about. I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about this. You can take a pass, but you talked about being a host and poking the rattlesnake, which I would never do, but pinching the baby, let's say. So I'm going to take this opportunity to pinch the baby here. There is a commercial that is running right now from a competitor to Tyson, and this is their slogan. Other chicken companies partake in cannibalization and they feed chickens to chickens. That's not natural. We don't feed chickens to chickens. We just have them in factory farming situations on cages where they don't see sunlight and they can't really breathe, but we are the natural option. Has it come to that we're informing the public about hey, it's a good thing. Everybody else has their chickens cannibalize each other. And so we're ahead of the game.
So I haven't seen the commercial.
Oh, it runs all the time.
Maybe that's just because I have 4 kids and they're home we've just gone back to school full half days. So
hooray for you.
I know. We're so excited. It's 9 a.m. and there's no, my wife and I are what do we do?
Oh, that's congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I had nothing to do with it, but I take your congratulations anyway. Look, marketing is there to drive interest and demand. And I think we all know, having gone through probably one of the most ridiculous election cycles in recorded history, that advertising serves a purpose, right? It's to draw attention, it's to shock you, and it's to get you talking about it, right? So I would say that ad is a successful ad because you and I are talking about it right now. Some people would say it's not a successful ad until it converts you into a customer. That's another way of looking at it. So I haven't seen the commercial. I know from my experience in the industry, I've never heard of chickens being fed other chickens.
Byproducts of chickens.
Or even byproducts. I mean, I've seen feathers ground up. I know that when the bird is exsanguinated, the blood is used to create aquaculture and fish feed, because fish are carnivorous animals. So I've seen some are, so they'll eat that product. And certainly there's renderings that go into the pet food business, right? So I've seen birds used to a full extent. I've never heard of them being used for other chicken feed.
I'm going to find that commercial and show it to you.
Send me the link. I want to see it. I mean, I don't want to see it, but I should see it to be.
They don't show anything. They just, it's mad world. Okay, we're going to kind of round up. I know I've had your time now for a while. We got a couple exit questions for you. Thank you for your time today. And I'm serious about that glass of wine, and we're going to, have this show again, maybe in a different way, getting down a little bit nitty or gritty than we are today. Today's such a global overlook. But can you remember, was there a point in time when you said, yeah, I think this plant-based thing is going to be big? Do you remember? Was there an event that took place or something that you, like a monumental conversation?
Sort of a seismic shift. I'm trying to think. I don't think it was. I think what it might have been was right after I started working at Tyson and getting involved with Beyond Meat, which was our first investment. I went to the grocery store and walked down the cereal aisle in the shop right in our town, and saw 12 different varieties of Cheerios and 6 different varieties of Fruity or Cocoa Pebbles. And at that point, it dawned on me that, of course, this is going to do well because consumers want options, right? I mean, how many different kinds of whole wheat bread? My wife sends me a story. She goes, get whole wheat bread, and I have a panic attack because there's 12 different. I just say, hon, what color bag?
I'll never get it right.
Purple. Okay, the purple bag. Then I'll go buy that one. but you tell me, oh, go buy the whole wheat bread I like, and then I feel like I failed husband of the year because I don't know what whole wheat you like. But consumers want options. Look at the dairy case. How many different varieties of almond milk and soy milk are in there? And they're all. It's not like there's a horse race and 12 get in there, and then there's only one at the end. They're still there. People are spending money to market these products. So that was probably for me when it was like, consumers are going to want this because it's another option. It's another ability for them to control their diet and say, I'm making a choice based on what's important to me, whether it's taste, value, sustainability, animal welfare. And those are all fine purchasing decisions. And we try to make it a point not to ever say that people should be, ultimately our companies are beholden to consumers, right? Consumers are the fountain from which all good things flow because they buy the products that our companies make. So who am I to tell a person, who am I to tell you that veganism is wrong for you? Or who am I to tell another person that being a carnivore is not good for you? I may not agree with your choice. I may be a vegan and think that you're evil for eating meat. But it's not my place to try and influence you. It's my job as an investor, though, to give the best companies with the best entrepreneurs the best opportunity to succeed. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Little bit of devil's advocate. I know what you're saying. Definitely everyone live their own life. But if you are walking down the street and you see someone, and I have seen this, but very rare, used to be very common, now very rare. Someone, put down their window and throw out their garbage. What do you think? It's their right? Everybody can do what they want. Or do we have to live on this planet together and can't really demolish it? So I know what you're saying. Everybody gets to eat whatever they want, but the food supply system can't kill the rest of us. So, there's something to be said there. Okay, I'm moving on because we're short on time. You can't say plant-based. Otherwise, what are your predictions for the food supply system? Let's say the next 5 years. You can change that to 10 if you need to.
I think it's going to be cell-based. I think we're going to see an explosion. One of the things we see in technology is it starts out slow and then it progressively gets faster, right? And the time between iterations gets shorter. And the size of the technology gets smaller, and it becomes more and more affordable. Right? When the first car phone, they weren't even cell phones; they were car phones when they first came out. I remember
they were like books.
You had a bag, right? I remember my dad had one. It was like a bag. It had an antenna you had to put up.
It was heavy.
And they cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Now there's more computing power on this than was in the Apollo missions that went to the moon, for crying out loud. So that I think we're going to see that in cell-based, and we're starting to see it, right? You have Future Meat made an announcement around their chicken breast is down to $7.50 now a pound, where I think Dr. Mark Post had a $300,000 hamburger a decade ago. So we're starting to see that pace of technological advancement increase. And another indicator of that is the more interesting companies are now the enabling technologies for the industry. It's not so much the branded products. You have the Memphis, you have the Futures, you have the A-Lifts, you have those all out there now. But now you're starting to see, and I'll plug a couple of our portfolio companies, Novel Farms, which is working on scaffolding. You're starting to see, it's fantastic, right? Or Billion working on flavorings. Cubic Foods working on the cell cultured fat, the myocytes, which is where all the flavor from meat comes from, right?
Yes.
People don't know that. When you walk into a steakhouse and you smell that aroma, that's the fat rendering on the grill. It's not the muscle tissue. And that's why Dr. Namias at Future Meat was so intent on having the cell cultured fat as well as the muscle. So we're starting to see a lot of that. It's being really interesting, where I think the next stage of growth is, which tells me when the enabling technologies are now the focus, the brands are getting ready to go and go in a big way. So we're really excited about cell-based.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that came out of my conversations from this person at Cargill. He was saying, we all know it's coming. And when it comes, it's going to be really hockey stick. It's just going to seem like it's from one day to the next. And I completely agree. And I think from an investment standpoint, it's almost much more interesting to look at, the semiconductor rather than the computer. So it's more interesting to look at the ingredient that will make cell take off. Cell-based agriculture take off than the actual cell-based brand.
If you look at a couple of the companies that are still around from the gold rush, it's Levi's and Wells Fargo, right? The companies that served the gold rush industry. It's going to be a lot of the same.
Part of the infrastructure there. Okay, what is it that you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now? And it can't be that the food supply system, it's not really food based because we've gone over it.
The difference between vegan and vegetarian. I wish I knew that 10 years ago.
And why? Just so that you didn't like mess up in conversations and people
Exactly. Yeah.
slap
So I
you.
didn't go to the conferences and be like, oh, so you're a vegetarian. And be like, no, I'm a vegan. I'm like,
Uh,
oh. And then it was an hour later and I still didn't understand the difference, but they were still going. It was, no, I think I wish I had a better appreciation for the food system, because I think I would have spent a decade making better choices, from a purchasing standpoint, from a career standpoint, and from how to apply what limited skills I have to improving those, to improving both of those. So I think that's what I would have liked to have. I just would wish I became enlightened earlier.
Mm. Yeah, I love that you say that. I always say something similar. I wish I had realized the power of my own voice, the power of a singular voice, how impactful that can be to change. I think it's easy to look at the whole world and say, like, well, what does my one recycling decision do? It's easy to fall into that logic. But you are seeing now really a shift in the food supply system because the economics are such that we have to do it. But also, again, shout out to millennials and Gen Z. They're really using their voice and putting their money where their values are. That is, contributing to the fast shift that we're seeing now in the food supply system. So there is a lot of power to the individual. And I think I wish I realized that earlier. 2 quickie extra questions. They're one-word answers. And when I asked these to Andrew, I think he gave me like a non-plant-based answer. Andrew, your colleague at Big Idea Ventures, now is plant-based, as I understand it.
He is plant-based.
Okay. Yeah. So now I'm going to have him back on so he can give me the right answer. But I'm looking for a non-meat, non-dairy answer here. You're running around, you're super fast. You don't have time for lunch. What's your go-to snack?
My go-to snack is a chocolate and peanut power bar.
Ooh, yummy, yummy, yummy.
Yeah.
Hard to go wrong there. And then if you're ever having a bad day, and during COVID, lots of people have had lots of bad days. Is there a phrase that you tell yourself to get yourself back in the game?
A phrase? Let's say probably either let's get some more coffee, or it's almost bedtime.
Both inspirational phrases.
I mean, every day ends at some point and a new day begins. So if you can make it to the end, you did good.
I love that. That's wonderful. I could talk to you for a very long time. I appreciate all your time today, all the knowledge that you've shared. Everybody subscribe to the Plant-Based Business Hour. Don't wait. You're always going to get information like this, which is so good. So thank you to everybody who watched here on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. This is, of course, going to go to podcast, and then it will go to my blog site. Again, thank you, Tom, for all that you do for budging the needle. I'm serious about that bank. So we're going to talk about that after the show.
I'm serious about it too. I'm going to have to work on modeling.
Great idea, right? Yeah. Okay, well, maybe I can help with that. We're going to end now. Tom, don't go anywhere. Everybody else, thanks for trying vegan at least, and I will see you next